Mateo Flores had been working quietly in the corporate gardens for 15 years, his weathered hands nurturing every plant with the same care he once showed his own children. The young interns laughed at his broken English, mimicking his accent behind his back, never knowing that this humble man held secrets that could change their understanding of success forever. But when CEO Naomi Vance walked into that conference room and heard their cruel laughter, everything was about to shift in ways no one could have predicted. The truth about Mateo's past would not only silence the mockers, but reveal a connection so profound it would reshape the entire company's future. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine corporate campus of Vance Industries, its golden rays illuminating the carefully manicured gardens that surrounded the gleaming glass headquarters. Among the meticulously arranged flower beds and perfectly trimmed hedges, a solitary figure moved with quiet purpose, his worn work boots leaving gentle impressions in the dew-dampened earth. Mateo Flores, at 68 years old, possessed the kind of weathered dignity that comes from decades of honest labor, his silver hair catching the early light as he bent to examine a struggling rosebush. His hands, marked by countless hours of toil and bearing the permanent stains of rich soil beneath his fingernails, moved with the practiced precision of someone who understood the delicate balance between nurturing and allowing nature to find its own way. The rosebush before him showed signs of distress, its leaves yellowing at the edges, and Mateo's experienced eye immediately diagnosed the problem. Too much water, not enough drainage, he thought to himself, in the mixture of Spanish and English that comprised his internal dialogue. The groundskeeping crew meant well, but they lacked the intuitive understanding that separated mere maintenance from true gardening artistry. Every morning for 15 years, Mateo had followed the same ritual. He arrived at dawn, before the corporate world awakened to its daily frenzy of meetings and deadlines, when the gardens belonged entirely to him and the creatures that called them home. The rabbits that nested beneath the ornamental shrubs had grown accustomed to his presence, barely lifting their heads as he passed. The cardinals that built their homes in the oak trees he had planted recognized his gentle movements and continued their morning songs without interruption. This was his sanctuary, his cathedral of growing things, where he could find peace and purpose in a world that often seemed chaotic and unforgiving. The irony was not lost on him that he, who spoke with the earth itself in a language older than words, should be judged by those who had never coaxed life from reluctant soil, never understood the patience required to nurture something from seed to full flowering. His English, while accented by the Spanish of his childhood, carried the poetry of two languages, the richness of someone who had learned to navigate multiple worlds with grace and determination. Yet to those who heard only the surface sounds, who lacked the wisdom to listen for meaning beneath accent, he appeared diminished rather than enriched by his linguistic heritage. As he worked that morning, carefully adjusting the soil composition around the struggling plant, Mateo remained blissfully unaware of the group of young interns gathered near the building's entrance, their designer coffee cups steaming in the cool morning air. These were the rising stars of Vance Industries, recruited from prestigious universities with promises of fast-track careers and executive mentorship programs. Their pressed suits and confident demeanor marked them as the future leaders of corporate America, though their youth showed in the casual cruelty with which they observed the world around them. Jessica Martinez, a recent Harvard MBA graduate, whose family connections had secured her position in the company's elite management training program, stood at the center of the group like a queen holding court. Her voice carried the particular brand of condescension that comes from privilege unchallenged by real adversity, the sort of casual superiority that mistakes accident of birth for earned achievement. She had grown up in Beverly Hills, the daughter of a successful entertainment lawyer and a real estate developer, her path smoothed by connections and resources that made every obstacle surmountable, every setback temporary. "Look at the old guy with the plants," she whispered, her manicured finger pointing toward Mateo's bent form. "I swear he's been talking to that bush for 10 minutes like it's going to answer back. Does he even speak English, or is it all just gibberish mixed with plant names?" Her laughter was sharp and cutting, the kind that revealed more about the speaker than the subject, carrying within it the unconscious cruelty of someone who had never been forced to navigate the world in a language not her own. The group erupted in muffled laughter, their amusement feeding on itself as it often does among those who mistake meanness for wit. Brad Thompson, whose trust fund had cushioned every failure and smoothed every path since childhood, pulled out his phone and began recording, zooming in on Mateo's careful ministrations to the struggling rosebush. "This is comedy gold," he muttered, his voice carrying the casual cruelty of someone who had never been the target of such mockery himself. "My dad always said you can tell everything about a person's intelligence by how they talk. This guy sounds like he just got off the boat yesterday." The smartphone screen captured Mateo's gentle movements, his lips moving slightly as he spoke to the plant in the mixture of Spanish and English that had become his private language of care and attention. To him, the words were practical, encouraging, diagnostic. "Come on, Pequeña Rosa, you need better drainage, better air for your roots. We fix this together, okay?" But to the interns watching through their lens of privilege and prejudice, the scene appeared to confirm their worst stereotypes about education, intelligence, and worth. Sarah Kim, who had graduated magna cum laude from Yale with a degree in international business, added her own voice to the chorus of mockery. "I mean, I get that diversity is important and everything, but when you're representing a company like this, there have to be some standards, right? What if clients see this? What if important visitors think this is the level of professionalism we maintain?" Her words carried the particular venom of someone who had always been the model minority, whose own immigrant parents had sacrificed everything to ensure she would never be the target of such derision. Not understanding that her success had been built on the same determination and sacrifice she now chose to mock in others. The cruelty of youth often masks itself as harmless fun, but there was something particularly sharp in their mockery, something that revealed the deeper prejudices they carried without examination. To them, Mateo represented everything they had been taught to look down upon: manual labor, foreign origins, and the kind of simple dignity that their world had trained them to see as weakness rather than strength. They saw his age and assumed irrelevance, heard his accent and presumed ignorance, observed his gentle manner with the plants, and concluded that he lacked the sophistication necessary for their modern world. Marcus Wright, a recent graduate from Wharton whose father had built a pharmaceutical empire, joined the conversation with his own brand of casual dismissal. "I actually heard him speaking Spanish to some of the other maintenance guys yesterday," he said, his voice carrying the tone of someone revealing a scandalous secret. "In the middle of the day, during work hours. I mean, this is America, right? Shouldn't there be some expectation that work gets conducted in English?" His words revealed not patriotism but prejudice, not standards but small-mindedness that couldn't conceive of bilingualism as an asset rather than a deficit. The group's laughter grew louder, more confident, feeding on its own momentum as cruel laughter often does. They were young, successful, destined for great things, and in their minds, this gave them the right to judge and dismiss those whose paths had been different, whose struggles they could not imagine, whose contributions they were too privileged to recognize. Their education had taught them to analyze markets and manage resources, but it had failed utterly to provide them with the wisdom to recognize worth in unexpected places or the humility to understand that intelligence comes in many forms. Mateo, focused entirely on his work, remained oblivious to their attention. He had learned long ago to tune out the noise of the world around him, finding peace in the simple rhythms of tending growing things. The rosebush responded to his ministrations, its roots drinking gratefully from the newly balanced soil mixture he had prepared with the same care a pharmacist might use to compound a life-saving medication. This was his gift, this understanding of what living things needed to thrive, and it had served him well throughout a life that had taken him far from the small village in Mexico where he had first learned to coax life from reluctant earth. The village of his childhood had been poor in money, but rich in wisdom, where grandmothers passed down knowledge of plants and seasons, where survival depended on understanding the subtle signs that nature provided to those patient enough to observe and learn. His education had come not from textbooks, but from necessity, from the practical wisdom of people who understood that success was measured not in quarterly profits, but in the ability to nurture life and sustain community across generations. when drought had driven him north like so many others, crossing borders that existed on maps, but meant nothing to the hunger in his children's bellies or the hope in his heart. Mateo had carried with him more than just dreams of better opportunities. He had brought the accumulated wisdom of generations, the understanding that patience and persistence could overcome almost any obstacle. The dignity came not from the job you held, but from the care with which you performed it. His first years in America had been a blur of backbreaking work and careful saving. Every dollar earned weighed against the needs of his family and the education of his children. He had cleaned offices at night, worked construction during the day, tended gardens on weekends, always with the goal of building something lasting, something that would justify the sacrifices and validate the faith that had brought him so far from home. The English he learned came from television shows watched late at night after exhausting days, from library books checked out during lunch breaks, from patient teachers who saw potential where others might see only 10. Struggle. The morning progressed with its usual rhythm of corporate efficiency. Inside the gleaming headquarters, meetings were conducted in glass-walled conference rooms, deals were negotiated over expensive lunches, and the machinery of modern business hummed with its relentless pursuit of profit, and growth. The interns eventually dispersed to their various assignments, carrying with them the shared joke of the old gardener who talked to plants, their laughter echoing through the marble-floored corridors long after they had forgotten the man who had inspired it. But their mockery had not gone entirely unnoticed. Rebecca Santos, a senior marketing manager, who had been walking past on her way to an early meeting, had overheard enough of their conversation to feel a sharp stab of recognition and shame. She had grown up in similar circumstances to Mateo, the daughter of immigrants who had worked multiple jobs to provide opportunities for their children, and she understood both the sacrifice required to build a life in a new country and the casual cruelty with which that sacrifice was often dismissed by those who had never faced such challenges. Rebecca made a mental note to speak with her supervisor about the intern's behavior, understanding that such attitudes, left unchecked, could poison the company culture and create an environment where worth was measured by accent rather than contribution. She had worked too hard to reach her current position to stand by silently while others were diminished for characteristics that reflected strength rather than weakness, resilience rather than inadequacy. By midday, the executive floor buzzed with the particular energy that preceded major quarterly presentations. Naomi Vance, the company's CEO and founder, moved through her domain with the confident stride of someone who had built an empire from nothing but determination and an unshakable belief in her own vision. At 45, she commanded respect, not through inherited authority, but through the kind of earned leadership that comes from surviving every challenge the business world could throw at her, and emerging stronger with each test. Her corner office overlooked the very gardens where Mateo worked, though she rarely had time to notice the view during her packed days of meetings, decisions, and strategic planning. The demands of running a multi-billion-dollar corporation left little time for contemplation of the carefully tended landscape below. But occasionally, something would draw her attention to the window, perhaps the play of afternoon light across the carefully arranged plantings, or maybe just the rare moment of stillness in an otherwise frantic schedule. Today, however, something made her pause at the window longer than usual. Below, she could see the familiar figure of the elderly gardener, now working on a section of ornamental shrubs that bordered the main walkway leading to the building's entrance. There was something about his careful attention to each plant, the way he seemed to consider each one individually, rather than treating them as mere components of a larger design, that spoke to something deep in Naomi's memory. She had grown up in circumstances that taught her to value work for its own sake, to understand that dignity came not from the job itself, but from the care and pride with which it was performed. Her own journey from the daughter of a factory worker to the head of a multi-billion-dollar corporation had been paved with the recognition of worth in unexpected places, with the understanding that success often wore work clothes and spoke with accents that revealed journeys undertaken in pursuit of better opportunities. Her father had worked the overnight shift at a manufacturing plant for 37 years, coming home each morning with hands stained by industrial chemicals and clothes that carried the smell of machine oil and metal care shavings. But he had never complained, never expressed anything but pride in his ability to provide for his family through honest labor. "Mija," he used to tell her, "there is no shame in any work that feeds your family and keeps your dignity intact. The shame is in looking down on those who do what needs to be done." Those words had guided her through her own struggles, through the years of working multiple jobs to pay for college, through the early days of building her company, when every decision carried the weight of potential failure, through the prom, countless moments when others had underestimated her because of her background, her gender, or her refusal to apologize for either. She had learned that true strength often came disguised as humility, that wisdom frequently wore the clothes of ordinary workers, and that the most valuable insights could come from those whose voices were seldom heard in boardrooms and executive suites. The afternoon wore on, and the quarterly presentation approached with its accompanying pressure and ceremony. The large conference room on the 20th floor, filled with department heads, senior managers, and the cream of the company's rising talent, including the group of interns who had found such amusement in Mateo's gruff morning routine. The room itself was a monument to corporate success, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the city, its polished table reflecting the serious faces of those gathered around it. The presentation materials had been prepared with the meticulous attention to detail that characterized all of Vance Industries' communications. Charts and graphs told the story of continued growth, market expansion, and strategic positioning that had become the hallmark of the company under Naomi's leadership. The numbers were impressive by any measure. Revenue growth of 18% year-over-year, market share expansion in 3 key sectors, and employee satisfaction ratings that consistently ranked in the top 10% of comparable companies. As the meeting began, the interns clustered together near the back of the room, their whispered conversations punctuated by barely suppressed giggles. They had spent the day sharing their recorded video of Mateo, each viewing adding to their sense of superiority and shared amusement. The old gardener had become, in their minds, a symbol of everything they were destined to rise above, a reminder of the world they would never have to inhabit thanks to their education, connections, and inherent superiority. "I still can't get over that accent," Brad whispered to Jessica as the presentation slides began to appear on the massive screen at the front of the room. "It's like he's speaking some weird hybrid language. How do you even get a job here if you can't communicate properly? I mean, what does that say about the company's hiring standards?" Their laughter, though quiet, carried in the acoustically perfect conference room, a subtle but persistent undercurrent to the serious business being conducted at the front of the room. Several senior managers glanced back with disapproval, recognizing the unprofessional behavior, but uncertain how to address it without disrupting the important presentation taking place. Naomi, presenting the quarterly figures with her characteristic blend of authority and accessibility, noticed the distraction, but initially chose to ignore it, assuming it was merely the nervous energy that often accompanied these high-stakes gatherings. She had learned over the years to read the room's energy, to distinguish between engaged attention and distracted disrespect, and what she was sensing from the back of the room was beginning to fall clearly into the latter category. The presentation continued with its parade of charts, graphs, and projections, painting a picture of continued growth and market dominance that had become the hallmark of Vance Industries under Naomi's leadership. She spoke with the confidence of someone who had built something lasting, something that created value not just for shareholders, but for the thousands of employees whose livelihoods depended on the company's continued success. "Our employee retention rates continue to exceed industry standards," she was saying, clicking to a slide that showed comparative data across their sector. "We believe this reflects our commitment to creating an inclusive environment where every team member feels valued and has opportunities for professional growth, regardless of their background or starting position within the organization." The irony of her words, spoken while a group of interns mocked one of the company's most dedicated employees, was not lost on the senior managers who had begun to notice the disruption. Rebecca Santos, who had witnessed the morning's cruelty, felt her jaw tighten as she recognized the continuation of the same dismissive attitude she had hoped would fade with the daylight. But the whispered commentary from the back of the room grew more audible, more persistent, until even those seated nearby began to turn and look with disapproval at the disruption. The young professionals seemed oblivious to the attention they were drawing, caught up in their own sense of superiority and the bonding experience of shared mockery. Sarah Kim leaned toward Marcus Wright, her voice carrying further than she intended. "I bet if you asked him about market trends, he'd start talking about tomato seasons," she whispered, her comment drawing snickers from those around her. "It's kind of sad, really. The world's changing so fast, and some people just get left behind." The casual dismissal in her tone, the assumption that understanding plants somehow precluded understanding anything else, revealed the narrow thinking that privilege often produces. She had been taught to value only certain kinds of intelligence, to recognize only specific forms of success, and to assume that anyone who didn't fit her template must be lacking in capability rather than, quote, opportunity. Finally, during a transition between slides that highlighted the company's commitment to diversity and inclusion, Brad's voice carried clearly across the room with devastating clarity. "I bet that old gardener thinks a quarterly report is something you file with immigration services. Probably wondering when someone's going to ask to see his green card." The cruel laughter that followed this comment created a moment of uncomfortable silence that seemed to expand and fill the entire room like poison gas. The professional mask that everyone wore in these settings slipped slightly, revealing the shock and dismay that such blatant prejudice could be expressed so casually in a room full of corporate leaders. Naomi stopped mid-sentence, her presentation remote, frozen in her hand, as she processed what she had just heard. The words hung in the air like an accusation, not just against Mateo, but against every immigrant who had ever worked to build a better life, every person who had ever been judged by accent rather than action, every individual whose worth had been dismissed because they didn't fit someone else's narrow definition of acceptable. The professional mask she wore in these settings slipped entirely, revealing something harder and more personal beneath the polished exterior. This was not just about corporate policy or professional standards. This was about the fundamental values that defined not just the company, but the kind of society they were all helping to create through their daily choices and attitudes. "Excuse me," she said, her voice cutting through the awkward quiet with surgical precision that made every person in the room sit up straighter. "Mr. Thompson, Ms. Martinez, Ms. Kim, Mr. Wright, and your colleagues in the back, would you mind sharing what you find so amusing about our quarterly performance?" The blood drained from Brad's face as he realized the entire room was now focused on him with the intensity of a spotlight. Jessica shifted uncomfortably in her seat, suddenly aware that their private joke had become very public indeed and that the consequences might extend far beyond a moment's embarrassment. The other interns looked anywhere but at their CEO, their earlier bravado evaporating under the weight of unexpected scrutiny. The silence that followed was electric with tension, the kind of absolute quiet that precedes either revelation or catastrophe. Even the senior executives, accustomed to the rough and tumble of corporate politics, recognized that something significant was happening, though they could not yet guess at its nature or implications. We weren't really," Brad stammered, his usual confidence deserting him entirely as he faced the woman whose opinion could make or break his career before it had properly begun. "It was nothing related to the presentation, Ms. Vance. Just a private conversation about, workplace observations." The attempt at deflection fell flat in the charged atmosphere of the room, sounding exactly like what it was. A desperate attempt to minimize behavior that everyone present now recognized as inappropriate at best and potentially discriminatory at worst. Naomi's expression remained neutral, but those who knew her well could recognize the steel that had entered her posture. The subtle shift that indicated she was moving from corporate politeness to the kind of moral authority that had driven her success in the first place. She had not built her company by tolerating disrespect, and she certainly had not overcome the countless obstacles of her own journey by allowing others to diminish the dignity of working people. "I see," she said, her voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that commanded absolute attention from every person in the room. "And this private conversation was about our gardening staff, was it not? Specifically about someone's accent, their perceived intelligence, and their immigration status?" The specificity of her summary made it clear that she had heard more than just the final comment, that she had been aware of the ongoing mockery and chosen this moment to address it directly. The room had become completely still, with even the usual sounds of air conditioning and distant traffic seeming to fade into insignificance. Jessica, perhaps sensing that silence might be interpreted as admission of guilt, attempted to minimize the situation with the kind of corporate speak that she had been taught to use when difficult topics arose. "Ms. Vance, we didn't mean any harm. It was just, we were commenting on communication skills and professional standards. In a business environment like this, clear communication is essential for maintaining the company's reputation and ensuring effective operations." The justification hung in the air like smoke from a fire that was about to spread far beyond anyone's ability to control it. Every word revealed the depth of the prejudice that had motivated the original mockery, the assumption that accent equaled incompetence, that different somehow meant deficient. Naomi studied the young woman's face with the intensity of someone reading a complex contract, seeing in it the kind of casual prejudice that masquerades as professional concern. The sort of privileged blindness that allows people to diminish others while congratulating themselves on their superior standards and higher expectations. "Communication skills," Naomi repeated, her tone suggesting she was testing the phrase for its weight and meaning, examining it from every angle like a jeweler evaluating the stone for flaws. Professional standards. Interesting concepts to consider, especially from a group that seems to think workplace mockery and racial stereotyping represent the pinnacle of professional behavior. She moved away from the presentation screen, walking slowly toward the back of the room where the interns sat in increasingly obvious discomfort, their faces showing the dawning realization that their career prospects might be experiencing a significant downturn in real time. "Tell me," she continued, her voice carrying the kind of quiet intensity that made everyone lean forward slightly. "What do you know about the man whose communication skills you find so amusing? What do you know about his background, his education, his contributions to this company and this community?" The questions hung in the air like challenges, daring the interns to reveal the depth of their ignorance about the person they had so casually dismissed. Brad attempted a recovery, his voice taking on the false confidence of someone trying to bluff their way out of a losing hand. "Well, he's the gardener, right?" Brad said, his words coming out in a rush as he tried to regain some footing in the conversation. "I mean, I'm sure he's perfectly nice and works hard at what he does, but when you're representing a company, especially a company of this caliber, there are certain expectations about professional presentation and communication standards that need to be maintained." End quote. The patronizing tone of his response, the assumption that hard work was somehow consolation for presumed inadequacy, seemed to crystallize something in Naomi's mind. When she spoke again, her voice carried a weight that made everyone in the room understand they were witnessing something that would be remembered and discussed long after the quarterly figures were forgotten. "His name is Mateo Flores," she said, allowing each syllable to carry its full significance like notes in a musical composition. "He has worked for this company for 15 years, maintaining the grounds that create the first impression visitors have of our organization. Every plant, every flower bed, every carefully trimmed hedge that contributes to the professional image you seem so concerned about exists because of his skill, dedication, and deep understanding of how environments shape human experience." She paused, allowing this information to settle in minds that had never considered the expertise required to create and maintain the beautiful surroundings they took for granted every day. The gardens that served as backdrop to their daily routines, the seasonal displays that marked the passage of time, the carefully balanced ecosystems that supported wildlife in the midst of urban development, all of this existed because of knowledge and skill they had never bothered to recognize or value. "But, more than that, Mr. Thompson, Ms. Martinez, Ms. Kim, Mr. Wright," she continued, her gaze moving from face to face as she spoke each name. "Mateo Flores is a man whose story puts your concerns about professional standards into a rather different perspective, a story that reveals the poverty of imagination that allows you to judge worth by accent rather than craft. Action." The silence that followed was electric with anticipation. Even those who had no involvement in the original mockery found themselves drawn into the tension, sensing that they were about to witness something that would challenge their own assumptions about success, worth, and the hidden stories that surround us every day. Naomi returned to the front of the room, But instead of resuming her presentation, she seemed to be gathering herself for a different kind of speech entirely, one that would draw on personal experience rather than such corporate data. When she began to speak again, her voice carried a note of vulnerability that few in the room had ever heard before. 28 years ago, she said, her words carrying the weight of memory carefully preserved and deeply treasured. I was a 20-year-old college student working 3 jobs to pay for my education while maintaining the grades necessary to keep my partial scholarship. My father had been laid off from the factory where he worked for 15 years. My mother was cleaning offices at night to help make ends meet, and I was 1 semester away from having to drop out because we simply couldn't afford the tuition anymore." End quote. The room remained absolutely still, everyone present recognizing that they were being trusted with something deeply personal from a woman who rarely revealed anything about her private life or the struggles that had shaped her path to success. The vulnerability in her admission created an intimacy that transformed the sterile conference room into something more like a family gathering where important stories were shared and preserved. I had applied for every scholarship, every grant, every possible source of financial aid that existed, but it wasn't enough. The math was simple and unforgiving. The kind of arithmetic that doesn't care about dreams or determination or how badly you want something. I was going to have to leave school and find work, probably never to return, joining the ranks of those whose potential would remain forever unrealized because opportunity and resources had not aligned at the crucial moment. End quote. Her words painted a picture that was foreign to most of those listening, who had grown up assuming that education was a given, that financial constraints were problems other people faced, that talent and hard work were always sufficient to overcome any obstacle. The idea that someone like Naomi, whose success they took for granted, had once stood on the precipice of having her dreams destroyed by circumstances beyond her control, challenged everything they thought they knew about merit, and opportunity. She moved to the window, looking down at the gardens where Mateo could be seen in the distance, still working with the same careful attention he had shown that morning, unaware that his story was being told to a room full of people who would never look at him the same way again. "Then I received a letter about something called the Flores Educational Initiative," she continued, her voice carrying the wonder that still accompanied the memory after all these years. "A grant program I had never heard of, funded by someone I had never met, designed specifically to help first-generation college students complete their degrees when traditional financial aid fell short of their actual needs." The name hung in the air, its significance beginning to dawn on those listening as they started to make connections that would reshape their understanding of the morning's events. Jessica felt her stomach drop as she began to understand that their cruel entertainment was about to take on a very different meaning. The grant covered not just my remaining tuition but also living expenses, books, transportation, everything I needed to finish my degree and then pursue my MBA without the burden of debt that would have limited my options after graduation. It came with no strings attached, no expectation of repayment, no requirement to work for any particular company or pursue any specific career path. End quote. She turned back to face the room, her gaze settling on the group of interns who had started this conversation with their cruel laughter, seeing in their faces the dawning realization that their assumptions about worth and intelligence were about to be turned completely upside down. "The only thing that came with the grant was a simple note," she continued, handwritten in careful English on plain paper, that said education was the foundation of opportunity and that everyone deserved the chance to build their future on solid ground, regardless of where they started or what obstacles they faced along the way. The weight of revelation was beginning to settle over the room like a heavy blanket, transforming mockery into shame, superiority into humility, cruel laughter into the kind of silence that accompanies the succinct recognition of profound truth. "I graduated summa cum laude, went on to earn my MBA with highest honors, and used that education to build the company that now employs all of you and provides opportunities for thousands of others," Naomi said, her voice carrying the quiet pride of someone who had transformed opportunity into achievement, who had honored the faith that others had placed in her potential. "Every success I've achieved, every job I've created, every innovation we've brought to market, Every dollar we've contributed to this community's economic growth exists because someone believed that a factory worker's daughter deserved the same opportunities as anyone else, because someone was willing to invest in potential rather than judge by appearances." End quote. The implications of her words were settling over the interns like a crushing weight. Brad's face had gone completely pale, while Jessica stared at her hands, as if they might provide some escape from the growing understanding of how badly they had misjudged not just the situation, but the fundamental nature of worth and intelligence. "For years," Naomi continued, her voice carrying the emotion of a long-held mystery finally solved, "I tried to find out who had created that grant program, who had provided the funding that changed my life so completely, and made everything that followed possible." The paperwork trail led to a small nonprofit organization that had been established specifically to help students like me, but the actual donor remained anonymous, hidden behind legal structures designed to protect their privacy. She paused, allowing the tension to build as everyone in the room began to understand that they were approaching the climax of a story that would change everything they thought they knew about the man they had dismissed so casually. "It wasn't until I founded this company and began looking for grounds maintenance that I finally learned the truth," she said, her words carrying the weight of revelation that had taken decades to unfold. "It wasn't until I interviewed every landscaping company in the city and found one small firm run by a man whose references spoke not just of his horticultural expertise, but of his character, his generosity, his deep commitment to helping others achieve their dreams." The silence in the room was now complete, broken only by the soft hum of air conditioning and the distant sounds of traffic from the street below. Every person present was holding their breath, waiting for the words that would complete the transformation of their understanding. Mateo Flores, the man whose accent you find so amusing, whose intelligence you question based on his manner of speaking, whose worth you dismiss because of his job title, Naomi said, each word carrying the weight of moral authority earned through experience and tested by time, created that grant program with money he had saved over 30 years of working multiple jobs, sending most of his earnings back to Mexico to support his own children's education, while setting aside whatever he could to help others achieve what circumstances had prevented him from pursuing himself. The revelation hit the room like a physical force, causing several people to actually gasp audibly as the complete reversal of their assumptions became clear. The man they had mocked for his accent had demonstrated communication skills sophisticated enough to navigate complex legal and financial systems. The intelligence they had questioned had been sufficient to create and manage a successful grant program for over a decade. The worth they had dismissed had been proven through actions that changed lives and created opportunities for others. "When I offered him the position here," Naomi continued, her voice now carrying the full weight of personal gratitude and professional respect, "it wasn't charity or sentiment or some misguided attempt at corporate social responsibility. It was recognition of a debt I could never fully repay, acknowledgement of the kind of character and vision that our company was built to honor and reward." She walked slowly back toward the group of interns, her presence now carrying the full weight of moral authority that comes from having lived through genuine struggle and emerged with both success and integrity intact. Mateo Flores saw potential in a young woman he had never met, believed in the power of education to transform lives and communities, and put his money where his values were without any expectation of recognition or return. He understood that true success is measured not by what you achieve for yourself, but by what you make possible for others. The interns sat in stunned silence, processing not just the immediate consequences of their actions, but the larger lesson about judgment, character, and the unexpected ways that past and present can intersect to reveal truths that challenge everything we think we know about the world. "So when you question his communication skills," Naomi said, her voice carrying the sharp edge of controlled anger, "consider this. He communicated clearly enough to navigate the complex world of nonprofit organizations, educational institutions, and legal requirements to create a program that operated successfully for over a decade and changed dozens of lives." She paused, allowing the weight of this achievement to settle before continuing her systematic dismantling of their prejudices. "When you doubt his intelligence, remember that he had the wisdom to understand that investing in others' potential was the highest use of his own limited resources, the foresight to create systems that would continue operating long after he was gone, and the emotional intelligence to provide help in a way that preserved the dignity of those who received it. Brad attempted to speak, his voice barely above a whisper as he tried to find words adequate to the magnitude of his error. "Ms. Vance, we had no idea. We never meant to." "No," Naomi cut him off, her tone sharp but not cruel, carrying the authority of someone who had earned the right to speak truth to power. "You had no idea because you never bothered to find out. You saw an elderly man with an accent and made assumptions based on prejudices you probably don't even recognize you carry. You reduced a human being to a stereotype without ever considering that his story might be more complex than your first impression suggested." The room remained frozen in uncomfortable recognition of truth that cut deeper than professional criticism. Even those who had not participated in the mockery found themselves examining their own assumptions, their own tendency to judge based on surface characteristics rather than deeper understanding. You assumed that accent meant ignorance, that manual labor indicated limited intelligence, that age suggested irrelevance. Naomi continued, her words falling like hammer blows on the consciences of those who had participated in the morning's cruelty. "You made these judgments without knowing that this man speaks 4 languages fluently, that he holds 2 patents for innovative irrigation systems, that he has served on the board of 3 nonprofit organizations, and that his understanding of soil chemistry and plant biology rivals that of many PhD botanists." Each revelation struck like lightning, illuminating the vast difference between assumption and reality, between prejudice and truth. The interns who had found such amusement in Mateo's accent were beginning to understand that they had been laughing at accomplishments they could never match, dismissing expertise they could barely comprehend. Jessica, tears beginning to form in her eyes, finally found her voice through the weight of shame that was settling over her like a heavy cloak. "How do we make this right? How do we apologize for something so thoughtless and cruel? How do we face him knowing what we've done?" The questions hung in the air, carrying within them the recognition that some damages cannot be easily repaired, that words spoken in cruelty create wounds that may never fully heal. The casual nature of their mockery, the automatic assumption of superiority, revealed character flaws that would require serious work to address. Naomi considered the question carefully before responding, understanding that this moment represented an opportunity for genuine learning or merely superficial damage control, depending on how it was handled. You start by understanding that apologies, while necessary, are not sufficient. Real change requires examining the attitudes that led to this moment and committing to do better going forward. She moved back to her position at the front of the room, but the quarterly presentation seemed almost trivial now compared to the lesson that had unexpectedly emerged from what should have been a routine business meeting. It means recognizing that every person you encounter has a story, a history, a set of experiences that have shaped who they are in ways you cannot understand from a casual glance. It means approaching others with curiosity rather than judgment, with respect rather than ridicule, with the humility to understand that intelligence and worth come in many forms. The afternoon sun was beginning to slant through the conference room windows, casting long shadows that seemed to emphasize the gravity of the moment taking place inside. Outside, Mateo continued his work, unaware that his story was being told, his character being revealed to a room full of people who would never look at him the same way again. "More importantly," Naomi continued, her voice carrying the weight of hard-earned wisdom, "it means understanding that success, real success, is not about climbing over others or distinguishing yourself through their diminishment. It's about recognizing potential wherever you find it, nurturing it, and understanding that your own achievements are built on foundations that others have provided." She gestured toward the windows that overlooked the gardens where Mateo worked, the living testament to his skill and dedication visible to everyone in the room. "Every beautiful thing you see when you arrive at work each morning, every moment of peace you find in those gardens during stressful days, every positive impression our visitors form about our company culture exists because someone took pride in work that others might dismiss as menial. The silence that followed carried the weight of contemplation as everyone present began to reassess not just their opinions of Mateo, but their entire framework for evaluating worth and contribution. The comfortable assumptions that had guided their thinking were crumbling under the weight of revelation and truth. "I want each of you to understand something," Naomi said, addressing the entire room but focusing particularly on the interns who had precipitated this conversation. "Vance Industries succeeds because we value substance over appearance, character over credentials, contribution over conformity. If you cannot embrace those values, if you cannot see worth in people regardless of their accent or their job title or their educational background, then you will not thrive here." End quote. The message was clear, without being threatening, firm without being vindictive. It carried the weight of genuine leadership, the kind that inspires change rather than merely demanding compliance through fear or intimidation. Marcus Wright, who had remained silent throughout most of the confrontation, finally spoke up, his voice shaking with emotion. "Ms. Vance, I think I speak for all of us when I say that we're ashamed of our behavior and grateful for this lesson, even though we didn't deserve your patience in delivering it. How do we move forward? How do we earn the right to remain part of this organization?" His question revealed the understanding that their positions were no longer guaranteed, that their behavior had called into question not just their judgment, but their fitness for roles in a company that valued the kind of character they had so obviously failed to demonstrate. Naomi studied his face, seeing in it genuine remorse rather than mere fear of consequences. "You move forward by proving that you've learned something meaningful from this experience. You earn your place here by demonstrating that you can see value where others might see only difference. That you can contribute to creating an environment where everyone's potential can be recognized and nurtured." As the meeting began to disperse, with the quarterly presentation forgotten in favor of much more important considerations, Naomi made an announcement that surprised everyone present and would reverberate through the company for months to come. "I will be creating a new position," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone whose decisions shape not just corporate structure, but company culture. Director of Environmental Design and Sustainability. This role will oversee not just our grounds maintenance but our entire approach to creating workspaces that reflect our values and support our CAS mission. The room buzzed with speculation about who might be selected for such a significant role, but Naomi's next words eliminated any uncertainty and sent shockwaves through the assembled executives. "The position will require someone with deep understanding of how environments shape human experience. Someone with the vision to see potential where others might see only maintenance requirements. Someone whose character has been tested by challenges and proven through actions rather than words." She paused, allowing the tension to build as everyone wondered who among the senior staff might possess such qualifications. "I cannot think of anyone more qualified for this position than Mateo Flores. His 15 years of transforming our grounds, combined with his demonstrated commitment to nurturing potential wherever he finds it, his proven ability to manage complex projects and resources, and his deep understanding of sustainable systems, makes, quote, him the obvious choice." The announcement sent ripples of shock through the room. They were almost physical in their intensity. A groundskeeper being promoted directly to the executive level was unprecedented, the kind of dramatic gesture that would be talked about throughout the company and industry for years to come. "He will report directly to me and will have the authority and resources necessary to create something truly extraordinary," Naomi continued, her voice carrying the conviction of someone who had made a decision based on character rather than convention. "His first initiative will be to establish a new grant program, larger and more comprehensive than his original effort, funded by this company and designed to help employees and community members pursue educational opportunities that might otherwise be beyond their reach." End quote. The symmetry of the announcement was not lost on anyone present. The man who had anonymously funded Naomi's education would now have the resources to help hundreds of others achieve their own dreams, creating a legacy that would extend far beyond the corporate campus where it originated. Brad and Jessica sat in stunned silence, processing not just the immediate consequences of their actions, but the larger lesson about judgment, character, and the unexpected ways that past and present can intersect to reveal truths that challenge everything we think we know about success and worth. As the meeting finally ended and people began to leave, carrying with them a story that would reshape their understanding of leadership and character, Naomi found herself alone in the conference room, looking down at the gardens where Mateo was finishing his day's work. Tomorrow, she would have the conversation that would change his life as dramatically as his anonymous generosity had once changed hers. The next morning arrived with the soft promise of spring, and Mateo was in the gardens early as always, his practiced hands working to prepare the flower beds for the seasonal transition ahead. He had noticed the unusual number of people who had stopped to watch him work over the past few days, their stares carrying a different quality than the usual indifferent glances of busy executives hurrying to their important meetings. Some of them even nodded politely when they caught his eye, a courtesy that was new in his experience at Vance Industries, but which he attributed to the changing season. Perhaps people taking more notice of the natural world as winter gave way to spring's renewal. It did not occur to him that his own story had become part of the company's consciousness, that his character had been revealed in ways that transformed him from invisible background presence to respected figure. When Naomi approached him in the garden that morning, Mateo straightened from his work with the careful politeness that had always characterized his interactions with the company's leadership. She was, after all, the CEO, a person whose time was valuable beyond his ability to calculate, and he could not imagine what might bring her to seek him out personally. "Mr. Flores," she said, her voice carrying a warmth that surprised him with its genuine quality. "I wonder if you might have a few minutes to speak with me. There's something important I'd like to discuss." His English, while heavily accented, was far more fluent than the mocking interns had assumed, shaped by decades of necessity and determination, enriched by his understanding of multiple languages and his deep reading in subjects that interested him. "Of course, Ms. Vance. Is there a problem with the gardens? Something I can fix?" The humility in his response, the immediate assumption that any attention from above must indicate some failure on his part, spoke to a lifetime of being overlooked and undervalued, despite his contributions. Naomi recognized it because she had lived it herself, that reflexive acceptance of blame that comes from always having to prove your worth to those who held the power to determine your fate. "No problem at all," she assured him, her tone carrying the respect that his character and contributions deserved. "Quite the opposite, actually. I wanted to speak with you about your future here, about some opportunities that I think might interest you greatly." They walked together toward a quiet corner of the garden, away from the foot traffic of employees arriving for another day of corporate endeavor. The morning light filtered through the trees Mateo had planted and nurtured over his 15 years at the company, creating a natural cathedral that seemed appropriate for the conversation they were about to have. The path they followed wound through sections of the garden that told the story of Mateo's tenure at the company, each area reflecting his growing understanding of the site's unique characteristics and his evolving vision for creating spaces that served both aesthetic and ecological purposes. The native plant garden he had established in his third year provided habitat for local wildlife while requiring minimal water and maintenance. The meditation area he had created near the building's main entrance offered employees a place of quiet reflection during stressful workdays. "Mr. Flores," Naomi began, choosing her words carefully as they settled on a bench he had positioned to take advantage of the morning light. "I recently learned something about you that I should have discovered long ago, about a grant program you created many years ago, about the Flores Educational Initiative." The change in Mateo's expression was immediate and profound. The careful politeness remained, but beneath it, something more vulnerable emerged, as if he were seeing his most private generosity exposed to public scrutiny for the first time. His hands, still carrying the soil from his morning's work, trembled slightly as he processed her words. "How did you find out about that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper, his accent thickening with emotion as it always did when he was moved or stressed. "I made sure it was all kept private, anonymous. No one was supposed to know." The vulnerability in his question, the clear desire to have kept his generosity hidden from recognition or praise, spoke to character of the highest order, the kind of giving that expects nothing in return and asks for no acknowledgement or gratitude. I was one of the recipients, Naomi said gently, watching as understanding dawned in his weathered features. 28 years ago, when I was about to drop out of college because my family couldn't afford the tuition, your grant program made it possible for me to complete my education and pursue my dreams. The revelation seemed to stagger him physically, and for a moment, the elderly gardener appeared to forget entirely where he was. His mind traveling back through the decades to the small non-profit office where he had established the program that would touch lives he would never know about, in ways he could never fully understand. You, he whispered, his voice filled with wonder and recognition. You are Naomi Vasquez from the scholarship applications? The girl who wrote about wanting to help families like hers, who dreamed of building something that would create opportunities for others? The fact that he remembered her original name, the one she had used before marriage and later changed for professional reasons, before he even knew who she would become, drove home the personal nature of his investment in her future. He had seen potential in a young woman's application essay and decided to bet his own carefully saved resources on her success. I wrote that I wanted to build something that would honor the sacrifices my parents made and extend that same chance to families who might otherwise never have it, she confirmed, her own voice thick with emotion as she remembered the desperate hope that had filled those application essays, the fear that her dreams might die for lack of resources rather than lack of ability. You made that possible, Mr. Flores. Everything I've achieved, everything this company has accomplished, everything we've built together, exists because you believed in the potential of a young woman you had never met. Moi. Tears were beginning to form in Mateo's eyes, the kind that come from seeing the long arc of consequence, the way small acts of faith can ripple outward through time to create effects far beyond their original scope. His investment in her education had yielded returns he could never have calculated, dividends paid not just in corporate success, but in the jobs created, the innovations developed, the other lives touched by the company she had built on the foundation he had provided. I never knew, he said, his voice breaking with the weight of revelation and recognition. I never followed up, never checked to see what happened to the students who received the grants. I thought it was better that way, that they should feel free to succeed or fail without owing anything to an old man they never met. The generosity of spirit revealed in that statement, the understanding that true giving requires no expectation of recognition or gratitude, spoke to character formed by values that had become increasingly rare in their modern world. He had provided opportunity without creating obligation, opened doors without demanding that people walk through them in any particular way. That generosity, Mr. Flores, that vision, that understanding of what it means to invest in human potential, Naomi said, her voice carrying the weight of profound gratitude and professional respect, is exactly why I want to offer you a position that I think will allow you to have an even greater impact than you've already had. The magnitude of what she was suggesting seemed to overwhelm him entirely. The idea that his quiet work in the gardens might translate into something larger, something that would give him greater resources and broader reach to help others, was almost too much to process. I want you to become our Director of Environmental Design and Sustainability, she continued, watching as his eyes widened with surprise and uncertainty, to take your understanding of how to nurture growth and apply it not just to our grounds, but to our entire approach to creating environments where people can thrive, both literally and metaphorically. The silence that followed was filled with the sounds of the garden coming to life around them. Birds calling from the trees he had planted, the gentle hum of bees visiting flowers he had selected for their nectar, the soft whisper of wind through leaves that showed the health and vitality that came from his careful tending. But I am not educated like the others, he protested, falling back on the self-doubt that a lifetime of being underestimated had ingrained in him despite all evidence to the contrary. I have no business degree, no corporate training. I know plants and soil and growing things, but this sounds like something that requires much more than that. Naomi smiled, recognizing in his humility the very qualities that made him perfect for the role she envisioned, the combination of practical wisdom and character that no amount of formal education could provide. Mr. Flores, you created and managed a grant program that operated successfully for over a decade, helping dozens of students complete their education, she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who understood exactly what such an achievement required. You navigated the complex world of nonprofit administration, legal requirements, and financial management while working full-time and supporting your own family. She gestured toward the gardens around them, the living testament to his skill and vision. You transformed these grounds from basic landscaping into something that elevates everyone who experiences them. You understood intuitively what our best consultants charge millions to explain. That environment shapes performance, that beauty and functionality can coexist, that investing in the spaces where people spend their time pays dividends in productivity, satisfaction, and loyalty. The conversation continued for over an hour, with Naomi explaining her vision for the role, and Mateo slowly beginning to believe that his skills, knowledge, and character might indeed translate into something larger than crack he had ever imagined. The boy who had left school at 14 to help support his family, who had learned English from television and library books, who had built his understanding of finance and administration through necessity and determination, began to see himself through her eyes rather than through the lens of his own limiting assumptions. The position would come with significant resources, Naomi explained, including a budget for environmental initiatives, educational programs, and community outreach. Your first project would be to establish the Vance Flores Educational Partnership, a comprehensive program that would make your original grant initiative look small by comparison. End quote. The idea that his private generosity could become something much larger, something with the resources to help hundreds rather than dozens of students, brought fresh tears to his eyes. The circle was completing itself in ways that felt almost magical. The anonymous gift that had changed one life, now growing into something that could transform an entire community. By the time they parted, with Mateo promising to consider the offer overnight, though his answer was already clear in his heart, word of the promotion had begun to spread through the company like wildfire. The interns who had mocked him found themselves the subject of intense scrutiny from their peers, their behavior becoming a cautionary tale that would be remembered and discussed for years to come. Jessica Martinez, in particular, found herself profoundly changed by the experience. The shame of her behavior had kept her awake for 2 nights, forcing her to confront aspects of her character that she had never examined before. She requested a meeting with Naomi, not to make excuses or minimize her behavior, but to understand how she might learn from her mistakes and develop the kind of character that could see worth where others saw only differences. "I keep thinking about what I missed," she told Naomi during their conversation, her voice carrying the weight of genuine remorse and determination to change. "How many other people have I dismissed without ever really seeing them? How many opportunities for learning, for growth, for connection have I lost because I was too arrogant to look past surface differences?" It was the beginning of a transformation that would define the rest of her career, leading her to become one of the company's most effective leaders, precisely because she learned to value substance over style, character over credentials, contribution over conformity. The lesson learned in that conference room would guide her decision-making for decades to come, influencing how she hired, how she evaluated performance, and how she treated every person who crossed her path. Brad Thompson's response was different, but equally significant. The shame of his behavior drove him to examine the privilege that had shaped his worldview, the assumptions he had inherited without ever questioning their validity or fairness. He began volunteering with literacy programs in immigrant communities, not as penance but as education, learning to see the world through the eyes of those whose struggles he had never bothered to understand. The work was humbling in ways that his privileged upbringing had never prepared him for, but it was also transformative. He met people who spoke multiple languages, who had overcome obstacles he could barely imagine, who possessed wisdom and resilience that put his own complaints about life's challenges into stark perspective. The transformation was not immediate or dramatic, but it was real and lasting, the kind of genuine change that comes from confronting uncomfortable truths about oneself and choosing growth over defensiveness. Mateo accepted the position, of course, though it took several conversations with his family and considerable encouragement from his wife Maria before he could fully embrace the magnitude of the opportunity. When he told her about Naomi's revelation and the offer it had inspired, Maria wept with joy and vindication. "You see, mi amor," she said, holding his weathered hands in her own, hands that had supported his dreams even when it meant sacrifices for their own household. I always told you that good things come back to those who give, without expecting return. This woman, she became successful, but she did not forget where she came from. She honored what you did by becoming someone who could give back even more. The wisdom in her words, the understanding that true success creates the obligation to lift others as you climb, captured the essential truth that both Mateo and Naomi had intuited independently and now shared as the foundation of their professional relationship. Mateo's first day as Director of Environmental Design and Sustainability was unlike anything he had experienced in his 15 years at the company. Instead of arriving before dawn to tend plants in solitude, he found himself in meetings with architects and engineers, reviewing plans for sustainable building initiatives, discussing budgets for educational programs, and learning to navigate the complex world of corporate leadership. The transition was not without its challenges. The formal language of business meetings, the complex financial projections, the endless acronyms and technical terms that filled corporate communications, all of this required adjustment and learning. But Mateo approached these challenges with the same patience and determination that had served him in the gardens, understanding that growth takes time and that competence comes through practice rather than innate ability. His first act as director was to establish the Vance Flores Educational Partnership, a comprehensive program that dwarfed his original grant initiative in scope and resources. The program would eventually help hundreds of students complete their education, but more than that, it would create a culture within the company that valued learning, growth, and the recognition of potential wherever a task might be found. The announcement of the program sent ripples throughout the business community, not just because of its size and scope, but because of the story behind it. The tale of the humble gardener who had anonymously funded his CEO's education, only to be promoted to executive status when that history was revealed, became a legend of sorts in business circles. Mateo became a sought-after speaker at conferences and business schools, his heavily accented English carrying wisdom that transcended linguistic boundaries. His presence on corporate panels challenged audiences to examine their own assumptions about success, intelligence, and value, forcing them to confront the prejudices that might be limiting their ability to recognize talent and potential. When I came to this country 45 years ago, he would tell these audiences, his voice carrying the authority of lived experience, I had nothing but hope and willingness to work. I did not speak the language well. I did not understand the culture. I had no connections or advantages, but I had something that cannot be taught in any school. I had the understanding that my success would be measured not by what I achieved for myself, but by what I made possible for others. His words resonated with people from all backgrounds, but particularly with immigrants and first-generation Americans who recognized their own struggles in his story. He became a symbol of possibility, proof that worth could not be measured by accent or appearance, that intelligence came in many forms, and that the truest measure of success was the positive impact one had on others. Years later, as Naomi prepared to step down as CEO and transition leadership to the next generation, she would often walk through the gardens that had started it all, marveling in how a moment of cruelty from ignorant interns had revealed a connection that changed both her company and her understanding of what true leadership required. The gardens themselves had been transformed under Mateo's leadership, evolving from beautiful but conventional landscaping into a living laboratory of sustainable practices and environmental innovation. Solar panels disguised as flower sculptures powered irrigation systems. Rain gardens captured and filtered stormwater runoff. Native plant communities provided habitat for dozens of species of birds, butterflies, and beneficial insects. The space had become a model that other companies sought to emulate, proof that environmental responsibility and aesthetic beauty could coexist and enhance each other. But perhaps more importantly, the culture of the company had been transformed as well. The values that Mateo embodied, the understanding that worth could not be measured by surface characteristics, had permeated every level of the organization. Hiring practices now emphasized character and potential rather than pedigree and connections. Performance evaluations included measures of collaboration and mentorship. The company had become known not just for its financial success, but for its commitment to creating opportunities for people from all backgrounds. The interns who had mocked his accent learned, in time, to hear in different voices, not limitation, but richness, not deficiency, but diversity of experience that strengthened rather than weakened the communities where it was welcomed. They carried that lesson into their own leadership roles, creating ripple effects that would influence corporate culture for generations to come. Jessica Martinez eventually became head of human resources, where she revolutionized the company's approach to recruitment and development. She established mentorship programs that paired experienced employees with newcomers, created professional development opportunities that valued different types of intelligence and experience, and instituted bias training that helped others avoid the mistakes she had made. Brad Thompson transitioned into the nonprofit sector, where his privileged background became an asset in fundraising, while his hard-learned humility made him effective in understanding and serving diverse communities. He established a foundation focused on educational opportunities for immigrant families, carrying forward the lesson he had learned about the importance of recognizing potential wherever it might be found. The story of everyone mocked the gardener's accent, until the Millionaire CEO told them to stop, became more than just a tale of reversal and redemption. It became a teaching tool used in business schools and leadership programs, a reminder that worth is not determined by accent or appearance, that intelligence comes in many forms, and that the truest measure of success is not what you achieve for yourself, but what you make possible for others. In the end, the mockery had been silenced not by authority or punishment, but by truth, by the revelation that the man they had dismissed as unworthy of respect had been worthy of gratitude all along. And in that silence, in that recognition, lay the seeds of wisdom that would continue to grow long after the laughter had been forgotten, creating beauty and opportunity wherever they were planted by those who had learned to see beyond the surface, to the deeper truths that define us all. The roses that Mateo had been tending that first morning bloomed more magnificently than ever, their growth nurtured by soil enriched not just with fertilizer and care, but with the kind of wisdom that comes from understanding that every seed contains the potential for something beautiful, if only someone takes the time to provide the right conditions for growth. And in their blooming, in their annual cycle of renewal and beauty, they served as a living reminder that the most profound transformations often begin with the smallest acts of faith, care, and recognition of worth where others might see only weeds.